when people asked me what I did for a job and who I hadn't met before, and I said I am a podcast producer, they always thought that I was the one speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to say quite quickly, I do everything but sitting in front of the microphone.
Hi, it's Evgenia Pelevina, and this is the series about professional development. Here, I talk to people who really like what they do and ask direct questions about their work. The purpose of this podcast is to bring awareness to the diversity of career paths and highlight the beauty of different professions today. And today we have our guest, Andy Nielsen, senior podcast producer. Hi, Andy. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Evgenia, and thanks for having me. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you that you decided to take part in one of the pilot episodes. It's very nice to start with this amazing opportunity and talk about this profession. Maybe you can just share a quick overview about your job, about your work experience before.
Yeah, I work as a podcast producer right now, but I also have experience working in video production and photography, still photography. It kind of all started when I started to become a journalist. I ended up working in broadcast journalism, so TV journalism, for a couple of years. And I found out that I actually liked to be behind the camera instead of in front of the camera. And there was this thing called the global financial crisis that happened around 2008, 2009. And that was a really, really bad time. But it also came with the opportunity for me to take on the role as a video journalist. That really gave me the opportunity to hone my skills in both journalism and interpersonal communication, but also the technical side of recording video and audio. So I realized that there's a lot more potential in that creative area. So I diversified the areas that I worked in, and so now I'm also working in podcast. Plus, doing still photography, as I mentioned. So that's kind of like the route that took me to where I am now as a senior podcast producer.
Wow, this is awesome. I couldn't even imagine that you had this background in journalism. Wow, this is amazing. This senior podcast producer role sounds like a dream for many people, I guess, because it's like more like a hobby. Usually we have one job and podcast as a hobby, but having it as a main job, it's also awesome. Can you just share how did you start as a podcast producer? Did you learn something new before you started, or you just directly switched from your previous role? How was it for you?
I had to learn a lot of new things because I hadn't actually produced a podcast before I was kind of asked to start doing podcasts for the company that I worked at that time. So that was a little bit challenging and a little bit nerve-wracking. But I felt that there was an easy transition. And as I mentioned, the skills that come from having done video work and the skills from having done journalism and reporting, I could really use them to just start creating podcasts. But what I found out was that when you don't have the visual elements to back up your storytelling, you really have to be good at creating high quality audio. And that was something that I learned a lot about. So I had to really study what it means to create good audio. How do you record good audio? Where can you record good audio? What do you need in order to record this good audio? And I had a great team around me who was also ready to learn. And I think that helped a lot.
I want to clarify and follow up what you mentioned about the skills, because I think it's quite important for people who will be watching this video. So can you just list, what are the main skills that people should have, people who are considering to switch to podcast producer role?
For sure. In my opinion, you need to have good people skills.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to communicate with people openly. You gotta be able to build trust and be trustworthy. I feel like these things are very important in this business for a couple of reasons. One is there's a lot of people out there doing this job, and there's a lot of people producing podcasts. So if you can be the person that people actually trust and believe will do the job that you're set out to do, I think you're gonna get more jobs. Obviously, if you're freelancing or like on a contract, you might need this more than if you're in a full-time position. But again, full-time positions, they can end suddenly. So it's really good to have that element of being trustworthy. The next thing is obviously technical skills. I would say having the interest in knowing how to use microphones and audio interfaces and the software is very important. I don't think it's crucial to be the best and know everything, but understand what can amplify, to use such a word, your podcast to a higher level is a really important skill to have. And this can come from just, researching or reading articles in fora about audio production, or if you're on social media, follow people who you think produce really nice stuff. You might suddenly see, they're using this tool, or they're talking about this, or I think this is very important to be aware of what's going on out there and be keen on learning. Always want to know more. I think that's really crucial.
So this is like a kind of production skills also, like technical.
Exactly, yeah. And then when if you also have the responsibility of sitting in a room with people and getting the best out of them, then this kind of interpersonal skill is something that if you don't have it already, or if you feel like it's something you might not find as your strongest asset, try and work on that. Try and understand what it means to be where I'm sitting right now, because as I said, I usually don't sit here, but I have done quite a lot of other work. I also do voiceover stuff, so I kind of understand what it means to be behind the microphone, and that the microphone needs to be where it is now and not like over here and stuff like that. So I think having those interpersonal skills is going to also give you the chance to be a really good director, and ultimately that's hopefully gonna make everyone more comfortable in the situation. I mean, it's not all the time that a podcast is recorded in a studio with lights and cameras and stuff like that, but it can also be very intimidating if you're sitting in a small room alone or with just one person to deliver something in a certain way. So if you can be the one who can make this situation a bit more comfortable and relaxing, you're gonna get a much better outcome.
I think also what can help here, if you even don't have this experience of 10 years or something in the area, it's like awareness of trends and of what's going on, outside, just to check in last podcast, like on different platforms, like, and try to understand what is common, what do you like about them, and then you can bring these changes and like suggest some new ideas. It's amazing. And it's also relevant to almost every kind of job. Can you explain what did you do as like a podcast producer on your daily basis?
I was involved in pretty much all stages of podcast production. So just to simplify it, it would be from the conceptual phase, when you start figuring out what should the podcast be about, figuring out who is it for, what's the target audience, into the who's going to be recording it, who are we casting for this podcast? Is it going to be a host? Is it going to be a guest? Is it what type of podcast is it? Because there's plenty of different podcasts out there, and that's pretty easy to see if you just go on any kind of podcast platform. And then after that, I was very, very much involved in the pre-production, where we're shooting it, how we're recording it, and and then into actually recording, directing the guests, the talents, and then obviously comes the post-production, so the editing, the mastering, and it's something that we're all excited about. What comes after that is the release, obviously, and then seeing how it sits with the audience after that. So going through the reviews or listening to the emails that come in from listeners, and how can we use that information to then be even better next time when we produce the next podcast. So that's kind of like a broad overview of the different stages. And I would say, in my opinion, a good podcast producer has an idea of all the different areas, but focuses mostly in the areas that they feel more comfortable in. And for me, that would be from pre-production to post-production in that area. But having the knowledge and being keen on learning and being part of all the stages, I think creates the best podcast end product.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's relevant for any kind of profession. When you lead in some project, it's nice to understand the whole process, and then you can be better manager of the team. But approximately how many people were involved in podcast production?
So in the last team I worked, we had like a core team of about 8 to 10 people.
Wow.
But we could not have done this without the huge amount of freelancers that we were working with, and obviously all the talents that come in and sit in front of the microphone like I'm doing right now. That's actually a kind of a funny thing when people asked me what I did for a job, and who I hadn't met before, and I said I am a podcast producer. They always thought that I was the one speaking, and I had to say quite quickly, I usually said I do everything but sitting in front of the microphone. We had a great team of freelancers and external support, but our sort of core team was about 10 people.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds a lot. So many people. And what was the most challenging part of podcast production for you?
For me, it's probably a very topical thing, and that's the fact that we were creating podcasts during COVID lockdown. And I started seeing some podcasts coming out, and everything started with this kind of preamble of saying, this podcast was recorded during lockdown, that's why the audio quality is not very good. And then it goes into this kind of, it sounds like they're just sitting in a bathroom, and you can...
Maybe it was.
Maybe it was, and wasn't there a better room to use? Anyway, I didn't want the podcast to be affected by that, or at least I wanted to be affected as little as possible. So the biggest challenge there was to take that perfectionist approach that I might have had and say, what is the best we can do under these certain circumstances? And I think we did a really good job, actually. I think we managed to figure out a way to produce high quality, but still under these kind of challenging situations.
Yeah, we also had a talk with you about the choosing the topic for podcast. That many people, I'm gonna do a podcast on this topic, and nobody will be listening to this podcast. So I guess you mentioned before when we talked before this series that it's also challenging. How did you deal with that, with choosing the topic, and sometimes maybe when people suggest some topics, but you already can have kind of assumption that it won't work? How was it for you?
You have to understand who your target audience is. In my last position, I worked for a company that was producing podcasts for language learning purposes. So we knew that the people out there were interested in using this medium to improve their language skills. So already there we were kind of funneling it down to a certain area of content. You could find different topics, but it's how you packaged it that means something. So we talked a lot about formats. We had about 7 different formats.
Wow.
You might know some of them, like what we're doing right now, this kind of hosted show. But we also had something that was like more event based. We had this kind of narrative, so it's more like a storytelling element, and many other podcasts. And within those formats, you could have different topics, but usually you could create the same topics and have those same topics in different formats, they would just look quite differently. Like, let's say we were talking about food. The topic was about food. Right now, we could have a little banter about like what kind of food we liked, and maybe you eat something different to me, and we can maybe have a cultural exchange. But it could also be a very focused podcast that takes one food item and digs into that, and you learn all the vocabulary. If it's for language learning, you learn all the vocabulary around that for that kind of topic. So if you know what I mean, the topic is important, but how you package it should be catering to who's actually ultimately gonna listen to it.
Thank you for sharing. I think it gives better understanding about this role itself and the skill set. Can you describe your like typical day? What was the day like? Meeting, or like sitting in front of three laptop screens doing something in dark room, or like
Yeah, I mean, it's probably no surprise that every day could look quite differently. But one day could look like very focused on editing. So very focused in the software, sitting and like making sure everything sounds good and making sure we have all the right bits. Another day could be, very packed with meetings. Another day could be production, like we're doing right now. So having people in the studio and recording them, directing them, making everyone feel comfortable. And there's also the days, and those days I really enjoyed, was just spending some time reading through emails from listeners and seeing how people are perceiving the shows that we're creating. All those things are definitely parts of what a day as a podcast producer looks like.
One thing that you already mentioned, and I think it's like a part of the beauty of this role, is content creation, and you can easily get feedback, and it's super tangible what you're creating on daily basis. You can see reaction, feedback, and some jobs are really lacking it, and it's hard to sometimes find the feedback and value, and you start questioning yourself, but here you can see it immediately. This is awesome. And talking about that part, what do you like the most about your job and why?
Well, I think there's a few. I think I get a bit of a high, a little bit of a buzz from like during the production elements. When you've done all this planning, you've got the right people in front of the microphones, you've got the microphones set up, you've got the scripts ready, everything is planned, and then you got to actually execute on that. That moment, which sometimes can take 10 minutes, sometimes can take a whole day. I find that really exciting. And just seeing everyone working together for the same goal. And then the second thing is definitely seeing the response from the people who you are producing for. It just makes you really happy, and it makes you realize that you are on the right track.
And talking about these positive things, we should also talk probably about kind of frustration. What frustrates you the most, if you can be honest?
I mean, maybe it's not so much my role, but I produce something that needs to go out there in front of the into the audience, and so I would really like that we put a lot of effort into something that people actually listen to. But we live in such an oversaturated world when it comes to media. That if you don't have the right marketing campaign, or if the machines are not working in your favor, people won't see or listen to what you're making. And it can be really frustrating when you feel that's just not happening. It can be either internal in the company, that you feel like there's not an interest in that part of your company that takes care of that, or it can just simply be that the platforms are not, giving you that exposure that you're hoping for. I mean, I know algorithms is one thing, but I also know that there's also human beings behind it, and if you had a big name, you would probably get more exposure. So I think that's quite frustrating when you're spending so much time on something and then not enough people listen to it. I feel like you sit and feel it's a bit of a waste.
I totally can relate, and it can happen in many different professions, as mine also. How often did it happen with you?
it's probably mostly when you feel like you've done something that would something you're really proud of. I mean, I think, okay, to be fair, you probably produce a lot of shows, and some of them you're more proud of than others, and some of them you think this is the best thing we've done. When you see those shows not performing well, but then something you feel like, oh, that was like a easy, quick thing, and then they perform well, that's a bit frustrating, because I think that's not just to do with the content, that's also to do with how it's been exposed to the listeners. But I don't know how often. I can't really say how often these things happen, but I'm mentioning it because you can feel it when it when it happens, and it kind of sits with you, and it's like, oh yeah, wouldn't it just be lovely if you could just always have listeners to the things you do?
Yeah, it's amazing. Talking about your experience again, can you share some rewarding or memorable moment that you had during your career as a podcast producer? What was it?
I mean, there's one which is to win an award. We actually we did something in our team early on, and that was like putting in a list of dreams, and we could go as high as we wanted. And I remember I put in one of my dreams to win awards, and I didn't even know what kind of awards that would be, and I didn't really know if there was any specific awards. So I was probably just thinking Oscars and Emmys and stuff like that. So really, aiming high.
Yeah.
But it turns out that there was actually a specific award for podcasts in educational in the educational area. And one of our podcasts won that award. And
so cool.
That was quite special. From that perspective, that we actually reached one of the goals, or these dreams that might have seemed a little bit aspirational and maybe not so reachable, but we did it.
Okay. Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well deserved.
I mean, because the other thing is seeing the feedback and the support from the listeners is obviously what I will take away from this. If you don't have many people to listen to your podcast, that's fine. Maybe you just have a small group. We were fortunate where in that last role that we had a lot of people that were exposed to our podcast and could listen to them. That didn't mean they had to send us an email.
Yeah.
Or review it on the different podcast platforms, but many of them did, and that to me was also extremely rewarding. And something I will take away from this, knowing that I actually was part of producing something that affected thousands of people's lives.
I want us to switch to part of with the questions about professional growth in this area. So, as you said that you had so diverse background before you start as a podcast producer. So there is no school with like podcast producing back then. Maybe right now they exist. What do you think, which kind of backgrounds for this transition can be relevant and really can work?
I don't want to limit anyone thinking that if they don't have the right background or lived experiences, they can't work in podcasts. So if you like podcasts, that's a good start. If you like producing podcasts, if you like working with technology that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and is willing to learn how to go through figuring out how to fix things, definitely that's a good road into the production. And if you like being around people telling really interesting stories, that's also a really good reason for moving into this area. I mean, there's obvious educational backgrounds that will probably make the road easier. You can study sound engineering. You can study journalism. You can study, as I did, journalism. But you could also have studied video production. yeah, I think these are maybe the more natural entry points to this area. But a lot of us these days have recording devices in our pockets. So I think a lot of us have somehow gained skills we don't maybe think we have, and can easily transition from just, making videos for social media to working in the industry of making podcasts or video and stuff like that. So I think the road is maybe shorter these days than it would have been 10, 15 years ago. I think it's important to believe in yourself. Instead of focusing so much about what skills you think you need to have, try it out. Try and make a podcast. Take your phone, start recording something, put it together, find some free software online, and put it together and see if you have the interest in spending the time that it takes to put that together and tell those stories, and finding those people who, if you don't want to tell the stories yourself, who can tell those stories, and see how that makes you feel.
Yeah.
And let that be the entry point. I always find that to be the best way of starting any new job or anything. Because you can easily waste a lot of years studying something that then turns out you actually don't like what it feels like to perform that, or like to create that thing that you've studied for.
Yeah.
Here you can get that feedback instantly. Do you like it? Do people like what you're doing? Maybe there's something for you there.
This is amazing. I think you mentioned 3 very key thoughts that I want to highlight here, also as a follow-up on this section. That first of all, I want to add one that you mentioned: try it out. It works the best for any profession, and I really a big fan of this approach. And I think in that case, what can really help also to find a mentor, just to find on LinkedIn, on any social media, someone who can be super relevant for you regarding experience, and just ask this person to be a mentor, or just have a catch up, or maybe have a coffee once and just ask about the job, about the experience, maybe show something and get feedback. This is super valuable. You can grow through other people's experiences. And the thought that you mentioned first, that don't limit yourself. I really like how you put it, that there's no limits for people. If you really like to do something, it's never late. You can always try and learn, and you don't need to be a perfectionist, and you don't need to be the perfect from the very beginning. You can just try, and you're getting better. You're getting there. So this is the idea why we are doing this. And I've been doing career consultancy for last 10 years as a hobby. And I found out the main problem for people, usually lack of awareness about such a cool profession, especially this profession that appeared quite recently as podcast producer. It's fairly new, as you mentioned. And I think this is the purpose of this podcast, to bring this awareness, so people seeing you like a role model. Oh, Andy is actually cool. He enjoys a lot his job and what he's doing. So it's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing this overview.
You're welcome. And I think just to really highlight that point of that it being accessible, is that for sure I come with some background and some privileges that has given me the opportunity to do what I'm doing today, but I don't represent everyone in the world.
Of course.
But I really think that for something like podcast production, there is a lot of accessibility in there to just at least try it and see if you like it, and figure out, is this something that I might then start investing more time in? Because you can record with your mobile phone or with any kind of simple recording device.
True.
And the software you can find online for free. So I think it just makes it a more accessible and a more approachable career, but also something that you can quickly find out if it's actually the way you want to go.
Yeah, so the main outcome, try it out. There are so many opportunities for being podcast producer, even for yourself, for your own content.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you also one more question about this transitioning, but right now when you're already a podcast producer, where is your next step? Should it be only in this area, or where you can also use your skills? What do you think, your perspective?
I mean, you could, if you didn't have the background as I have, you could do the reverse and you move into video production.
Or journalism.
And then maybe move into journalism or, any kind of, or content producer online or social media producer or whatever.
Sound engineer also, right?
Sound engineer could be the next thing you could work. Yeah, you could start making maybe music production.
Popular in Berlin.
If you're there's many places in the world where music production is very popular.
Yeah.
And then I think it also opens up the door to areas of work where it's about talking to people, meeting people.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe hospitality, maybe that's something you'd like to do. I think also actually people coming from hospitality would have a really good head start in working in podcast production when it comes to like bonding with people easily. Yeah. I mean, there's probably plenty of other areas where you wouldn't have thought, oh yeah, I can use those skills. But that's just what comes to my mind immediately.
Yeah, thank you. I do agree. It's like so many open doors with all these skills, and also you're learning how to work with these other people who are also like professionals in the area, as a sound design, for instance, during the podcast production. Also, I think you can actually switch even to communications or, I don't know, film directing. Of course, you need some more skills there, right? You need to learn something new, but it's also seems like nice path for the people from there. But I think this profession also give you so many like soft skills that we say usually, so it can provide you many other opportunities where it's needed. One more question. It's actually a tricky one. Let's talk about in general salary range. And of course, I should mention here that salary range dependent on the country, on the company where you're working at. So there are so many different options, but in average, can you give at least some overview from your perspective, some hints, for people who are considering to be a podcast producer?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely not uncomfortable talking about salary, but I also don't want to put numbers out there that are, as you're mentioning, unrealistic for the people if they don't are in the same situation. But I can say that if you think about what a primary school teacher earns, I feel like a lot of us have an idea that where that sort of lies roughly. I think podcast producers can earn similar, maybe slightly more, again dependent on who is your employer. If you go freelance, you also have the opportunity to get some really good clients where you can set your own rates. But then of course it comes with the difficulty of keeping those clients and not always knowing if you're gonna have stable income. Yeah. I've been very pleased with what I've been paid for doing this job, and I think it's a fair wage. It's a wage that reflects the diversity of what this job actually encompasses. And we've talked about how many things sits within the role of a producer.
Yeah, so true. And probably we can also say that the salary range here, it's kind of similar for the same group of roles from this creative sphere.
Yeah, if you think of video producers or music producers and stuff like that, it's probably in the same area, give or take. Again, experience plays a role, but it's definitely an area where you can also see a lot of range based on experience,
Of course, yeah.
And it's good because you can start out not feeling that you're not being paid anything. You'll be paying less than a more experienced person, most likely. But you can actually start out feeling this is a proper wage, and this is something that I can move my way up in the hierarchy. But yeah, definitely would be worried if someone said, "Oh yeah, we'll pay you in t-shirts and socks." Then no, that's not the business. That is not what this business should be.
But I also want to add here, there is different, again, circumstances why people switch between jobs, or like when they start doing this, which background do they have. And it's actually not only for podcast producers, it's for any job that to, especially a job in creative spheres, you need to have a kind of portfolio. And sometimes it's nice to experience more and do a lot of pro bono projects, like do even freelancing for some brands just for free, and just do your build up your portfolio so you can have better offers later and also apply for some jobs. So don't expect that you will earn a lot or something like a senior podcast producer from the very beginning. Yeah, you should work on your portfolio, on your skills. And even if you are experienced one, maybe you are moving to another country or changing something, I don't know, changing company, so on, it can be different, and you should be ready to different situations. And I also want to recommend that when you are thinking about salary range, it's good to check it with some open sources like Glassdoor or any reviews, or some companies publish usually some yearly reviews of salaries, so you can kind of expect what you can have, and also talk to peers in the sphere, so you can have better understanding. So I try to compensate the lack of the numbers today, but I think we gave kind of impression and at least direction where people can find numbers and how they can find numbers.
I think so too. And I definitely, the last thing you said about checking in with peers, don't be afraid of sending people an email. I would love to have an email from someone and then it said, how much do you earn? And be like, yeah, I would say it, I would be very honest, or at least if someone said, hey, I've just got this job offer and they're paying me this, does this seem fair for this role?
Yeah.
That's a really good way of adjusting
exactly.
Your expectations, and also figuring out if you're being fairly treated.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying about working pro bono, but I do want to hesitate on if it's big brands, if it's people with money, they should pay you. I'm always of that perception. But if you want to build up a portfolio, again, it comes back to the thing. This is very approachable.
Mm-hmm.
Do something on your own.
Yeah.
Record your own. You don't have to have someone behind you.
Mm-hmm.
If you just want to create some content, you want to tell some stories, do that on your own, and let that be the free work you do, or work with some friends who are also not backed up by a big company or something like that, and that be the start. And then when the people with the money comes into play, remember to let them pay you, because you're doing a job that is being paid.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this talk about salary. A tricky one. Can you recommend any specific resources or learning opportunities that people who are considering to switch to podcast producer roles can use?
YouTube.
Nice.
But that's just for me. I like to see things while I hear things. But obviously podcasts are out there as well that talks about the technical sides of things. But then also if you want to work in podcast production, it's pretty good to listen to some podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, what are the trends? What are people doing these days? What do the podcasts sound like? Who are the people that are on there? And what are the varieties in the podcast world? What's missing is probably also the crucial thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't give you any examples of literature, but you can definitely find more technical books if that's what you're into in the library.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe also online as ebooks.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there are actually also some pretty good storytelling resources. Maybe we can link them.
Yeah, let's link them
to this, because sometimes it's not just about the production, but it's also how do you actually tell a good story. There is a podcast producer, I can't quite remember their name now, but we will link it.
Yeah, let's link everything under their series so people can see and follow.
Yeah.
And the last question for today, to follow up our discussion, what advice would you give to people who really think to be a podcast producer, how they should start? I don't know, main advice.
I'm gonna sound like a broken podcast record. Just try it out. Pick up whatever you have in front of you that can record, and record yourself or record someone else. Put it into a software that you can find online.
Mm-hmm.
Put it together. See what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
See what it feels like spending the time, but also what it feels like to putting this together. Like, how do you feel when you make this thing? Does it feel like it's just another job?
Mm-hmm.
Or does it feel like it's actually motivating you or giving you this kind of high, as I mentioned at the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
That should be what tells you if this is something for you. And if you have something really good, share it with someone and get some feedback. And who knows, maybe that leads to a job in the industry for a company, or you start being your own producer. You find people who need some assistance and they like what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't hold back. Get out there, get something done, and suddenly you might actually be working in this industry sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much, Andy, for your advice. It was really cool to listen to you and learn from your experience. And I want to ask everyone who is thinking about switching between jobs, don't be afraid and just talk with people who are already in this sphere so you can learn from them and ask these questions. And this is the aim of our series, to show these role models in different areas, because I really do believe that finding a job is like finding a partner. You explore different options, you try to figure out what suits you, and then you choose the perfect match. Thank you so much for today and have a nice day.
Thank you, you too, and good luck with the series.